They found 3 bodies in the ashes, one twisted, one crudely embalmed, and one never officially born. The coroner didn't dare write a report, only scrolling 3 words cannot be explained. When the pastor saw the wooden ring on the surviving child's hand, identical to the one shared by the Elbridge siblings, he left town and never returned. What happened in that windowless house in 1898 was so perverse, so unnatural, that the county records were sealed and the church was shuttered forever. But one birth certificate remained, bearing only 3 letters: E. Jacobson. Hello everyone. Before we start, please like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment about where you're from and when you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing stories like this. In Appalachia, some bloodlines don't flow outward, but twist into closed loops like streams, weaving through deep forests, winding, repeating themselves, never reaching the sea. Western Appalachia is one such place, cut off by jagged mountains and an economy that never took off. Families here rarely leave and rarely let outsiders in. They live, die, and marry within the same valley, the same surname, the same depleted bloodline. But the Elbridge story didn't come from poverty. It came from obsession. Jacob Elbridge was born in 1869, 3 years after the Civil War, in a wooden cabin with a single window built on a flat stone foundation on the northern slope of Beckett Hollow. Mary Elbridge, his sister, was born 3 years later during a frigid December night when snow fell so heavily it buried the path down the valley. No one in the village could recall their parents clearly. The only records in the church ledger listed an Elbridge family with 3 children, 2 boys, 1 girl, followed by a gap spanning nearly 20 years. Some elders said Jacob and Mary's parents died of yellow fever. Others whispered they vanished without a trace after a particularly brutal winter when ice lingered until mid-April. Whatever the truth, by the time Jacob was 10, the 2 children lived alone in the mountainside cabin. No guardian, no kin, and absolutely no visitors. The townsfolk, though they wouldn't admit it, knew the children survived. Once a month, Jacob came to town to buy rice, salt, lamp oil, and sewing needles. As a boy, he moved silently, head bowed, eyes fixed on his worn boots. But by 16, Jacob grew unnaturally tall. He topped 6 FT, gaunt as a scarecrow, skin pale as if untouched by the sun, deep-set eyes, lips pressed tight, long hands veined like tree roots. When Jacob entered the store, people fell silent, letting him pick his goods, place coins on the counter, and leave without a word. No one asked him questions nor answered if he spoke. They were afraid, though, of what they couldn't say. Maybe it was how Jacob never smiled. Maybe it was the sense that when he turned his head, an invisible shadow followed. Mary was almost never seen. Throughout her childhood, the village knew her only through the postman's tales and curious children who climbed the ridge. They spoke of a girl in a white dress, hair to her waist, standing behind the window, always holding a doll made of corn husks and rags. Some thought she was sickly or crippled, but no one confirmed it. Only once in 1889 did Mavis, the town seamstress, say a young girl quietly entered her shop, bought red thread, darning needles and white lace, then pulled a worn ancient coin from her pocket. When asked her name, the girl only smiled and pointed to the wooden ring on her hand, faintly carved with 3 letters, JME. Rumors spread. At first it was the children. They claimed that at night from the mountain cabin came twin laughs, one high, one low, one soft like a lullaby, one drawn out like a mimic. Some nights they heard scripture recited repeatedly, but when they asked the pastor, he said no sermon was held. Adults were more guarded. They didn't speak openly, but whenever the Elbridge name came up, the air in the tavern or bakery grew heavy. An old man who worked the eastern plantation swore that one foggy night passing the mountain's base, he saw 2 figures in the pine grove. They faced each other, hands lightly touching, still as statues. When he stepped closer, both turned to look at him simultaneously, their eyes identical. glinting with something not quite human. The community began calling the Elbridge cabin the place where mirrors live. Some said Jacob and Mary were two alike, not just in looks, but in voice, gait, gaze, even laughter. They didn't seem like two people living together, but like one split in half. One was the perfect copy of the other, and that perfection, instead of comforting, made people shudder. One night the grocer's wife heard singing from the mountainside as she closed her shop. The melody was simple, the words repetitive. We are one, not two, not three, just one. At first, she thought it was children playing, but when she turned, no one was there. Just wind and smoke rising straight from the northern ridge. Though no one said it aloud, by 1890, the valley knew Jacob and Mary Elbridge were no longer just orphaned siblings. They were something else, a bond without words, without concepts, without a place in traditional morals. Yet, it existed as part of the mountain. And like everything born of the deep forest, they needed no one's approval. They only needed to be together long enough, close enough for their voices to merge into one. By 1890, Jacob Elbridge turned 21. That year, the state sent a census taker to update the county's records. A young surveyor, newly arrived from Charlottesville, climbed the northern ridge of Beckett Hollow to confirm the scattered residents. When he returned, he submitted a strange handwritten note. Jacob Elbridge, head of household, resides at cabin number 3, Northern Tract, age 21. Gender, male, occupation, unknown, marital status, single. But what made the clerk pause was the second line below Jacob's name was another Elbridge. No full name, no age, no occupation. And in the relation to head of household field, it was blank. Not sister, not wife, not servant, just a shadow recorded but undefined. A presence the authorities couldn't categorize. When asked why he didn't fill it out, the surveyor replied curtly, "I didn't dare ask. The people of Beckett Hollow didn't need records to understand. They'd seen with their own eyes. They'd heard the sounds drifting from the Elbridge cabin on foggy nights, whispers blending together, sometimes like prayers, sometimes like pleas, and they'd witnessed something no one should have seen." That spring, during a small church festival, Jacob appeared with Mary, unheard of for years. They descended the ridge hand in hand, no hiding, no shying away. They walked through the community as if everything were normal, but the festival air froze. Children stopped playing. Adults bowed their heads. The pastor halted mid-scripture, staring at them as if they'd stepped out of a wrong dream. Jacob said nothing, only pulling a chair for Mary to sit. She wore a long white dress to her ankles, a thin wooden ring on her wrist, its surface etched with curling handwriting. Not brother, not sister, just one. Jacob's ring was identical. People said they were hand-carved from oak behind the house, where a stunted tree lay like a natural altar. A curious man once climbed the ridge to see it up close, but vanished after an afternoon, never returning. No one tried again. In the weeks after the festival, rumors grew specific. No longer something strange about those Elbridge kids, but they're married. An old woman swore she saw Mary leave the general store with a bundle of goods, her face flushed. A blacksmith claimed Jacob ordered 2 identical knives, their names entwined, J1 Ammon. But no one confronted them. When they passed through town, still hand in hand, steps mirroring like reflections. People turned away. Some pretended to inspect fruit, others ducked inside. Even the pastor, the only one with authority to preach, watched from his window, clutching his Bible, silent. In tight-knit communities like Appalachia, silence was the final form of acknowledgement. If you didn't speak it, you weren't bound to address it. But in their hearts, they knew Jacob and Mary were no longer just siblings. They'd become something else, a nameless union, not legal, not sanctified, but as undeniable as the mountain they lived on. Their presence cast a new atmosphere over Beckett Hollow. Children were forbidden from playing north. The pastor avoided mentioning marriage in sermons. Old folk songs were rewritten to emit verses about sibling bonds. Everything revolved around a black hole. A couple uninvited yet ever present. One October night, the seamstress heard a knock at her back door. When she opened it, no one was there, but a white ribbon tied in an old wedding style hung on the knob. A pressed flower sat between two loops of red thread. No note, no signature, just a symbol, like a declaration. We are one. A local proverb said, if blood doesn't flow outward, it ferments. And in Beckett Hollow, the Elbridge blood had begun to ferment. No longer rumors, no longer hunches. The signs were clear as moonlight on the roof, wooden rings, hands clasped, unaverted gazes, and two people so alike that by voice alone, no one could tell them apart. But the most terrifying thing wasn't their love. It was that they saw nothing wrong with it. In a land where tradition wrote the law, those who felt no fear made the whole community fall silent in dread. In 1892, Mary Elbridge's name vanished from all census records. The updated list named only Jacob Elbridge as the sole resident of the cabin. No three living alone, no kin, no cohabitants. The other household members column was blank. No E. Elbridge, no undefined relation, not even a smudged line hinting at her prior existence, as if she'd never been. But Beckett Hollow remembered. They remembered well, and they began to whisper, Mary was pregnant. No one dared ask directly. No one saw her with a swollen belly, but small, scattered details piled up, enough to convince without witnessing. The seamstress said Mary once bought wide white cotton, soft lace and darning needles, items for infant clothes. An old postman heard broken cries from the trees near the Elbridge cabin, but when he listened again, only wind remained. A goth boy who climbed the ridge returned pale, stammering, "It has 6 fingers," before falling feverish for 3 days. The rumors solidified when the town's only doctor, Walter Griggs, stopped visiting the Elbridge cabin after a summer night. He'd been called there before for pneumonia or malaria, but this time his wife said Griggs received a brown envelope sealed with wax. No sender's address, just an embossed ring imprint. He read it pale, packed his medical bag with a lantern, scalpel, and a small leather notebook, and left. He didn't say how long he'd be gone, only repeating, "If I'm not back by dawn, don't come looking." Griggs returned at sunrise, shirt blood-stained, lantern empty, eyes bloodshot. He said nothing. He stored his bag, burned the notebook, and never spoke the Elbridge name again. Years later, after his death, his son found a rough journal hidden in the basement and gave it to the University of Charlottesville library. One page scrolled and trembling water smeared ink. Red child born at 2:14 a.m., normal size but clearly deformed, face asymmetrical, cheekbones misaligned, nose without a bridge, eye sockets pulled low, eyes open, unable to close, mouth full of tiny, dense teeth, chin jutting forward like an animal's jaw, right hand with 6 fingers, left with 7, each with nails. No crying, no screaming, only staring constantly. The note ended with a barely legible line. "I cannot call this human. I cannot call this God's creation." The remaining pages were torn out. No mother's name, no father's name, no full description of the birthplace. But for those living near the Elbridges, no names were needed. They knew and they understood why Mary vanished from records. From then on, no one saw her in town. No one saw her beside Jacob, but the mountain still echoed with twin laughs, sometimes distant, sometimes near, sometimes male, sometimes female, and sometimes both at once. The oldest postman near death confessed to the pastor that he'd been paid handsomely to deliver a small wooden box, light as if empty, lined with hand-stitched white cloth and soft lace. The lid bore a strange inscription, not English, not Latin. When he asked what it was, Jacob only said, "It's a name." The community no longer feared Jacob just for his incestuous bond with his sister. They feared him for creating a new entity, a nameless, unique being unaligned with human order. They didn't know if it lived or died. No one knew if Mary still existed. But from 1892 onward, the Elbridge house wasn't two people. It was three, a third presence, unseen, but felt. Children began dreaming of an eyeless boy with extra fingers standing behind the window. Adults glimpsed figures in the woods that vanished on approach, and whenever someone mentioned Mary, the village air grew heavy, as if an invisible door had shut mid-sentence. In Grigg's final journal, sealed in an envelope, was a line written with his left hand, after his right began trembling too much to hold a pen. I saw it open its eyes. I saw it look at me, and I knew it shouldn't exist. After 1892, Jacob Elbridge rarely came to town. No one saw him at the market, heard his steps on the dirt road, or received letters or orders from the northern cabin. The only proof he was alive and building something was the sound of hammering, sawing, and a faint light flickering in the forest all winter. At first, villagers thought he was repairing the cabin, but when a bold new postman from the next county climbed the ridge to deliver mail in person, he returned after 3 hours, pale, vomiting in the village street, and quit the next day. He repeated one sentence, feverish, no windows, no way out. Every hallway leads back to itself. Jacob hadn't repaired the cabin, he'd rebuilt it, and what he created wasn't a house. It was a bizarre structure, an oak complex of 7 separate rooms, linked by narrow, dark corridors with sharp turns that made you feel like you were circling. Each room connected by solid wooden doors, handleless, opening one way, no window. The old openings were boarded with thick nailed planks, impenetrable from outside. On the roof, Jacob added a folded gable blocking natural light. The villagers, unwilling to name the house, whispered of it as the womb, not by chance. They called it that because everything born there was unnatural, from Jacob, from Mary, whether alive or dead, and from the deformed child, a being never acknowledged but always present. The womb was a mix of fear and contempt, a place that nurtured life, but a perverse, twisted life against nature, a place where things meant for light were raised in darkness through whispers, wooden rings, and their own blood. At night, when fog was thickest, the village heard inexplicable sounds. Some nights wood groaned under weight, as if someone circled endlessly. Some nights water dripped for hours, but on moonless nights, when the forest was silent, no birds, no wind, the womb erupted in chaos. Children's shrill laughter cut short, bare feet running on wood, and sometimes a woman's sobs choked between gasping breaths. The sounds weren't loud but persistent, seeping into the village's sleep, giving children nightmares, and keeping adults awake, frozen in bed. The only one who tried to explain was Pastor Clean. In a rare sermon, he wrote, "Not every place of birth is holy. Some wombs don't grant life, but trap souls in a cycle of blood that can never be cleansed." He never mentioned the Elbridges again. The community grew more cautious, quieter. They learned to avoid the northern trail. Children were forbidden from climbing the hillside, even to pick mushrooms or berries. Hunters stopped setting traps nearby, though no one had seen anything horrific firsthand. They believed abnormality needed no proof. Its existence was enough. Occasionally, some glimpsed Jacob's silhouette at the forest's edge, his tall frame cloaked in black, head covered by a cloth hat, barefoot, still as a stone pillar. Some claimed he held a small child or something like one, swaddled in linen, swaying as if soothing it. But when they blinked, the figure vanished as if it had never been. The rare letters sent to Jacob from the county office, the health department, or the old pastor, now relocated, went unanswered. The last letter left by the postman on a wooden post at the gate was returned a week later, envelope intact, but the paper inside blank. Scrolled on the envelope in smudged red ink were 3 words, no one left. From then on, the village stopped naming the Elbridges. They spoke only of the womb, like a bruise no one dared touch. And deep within each person, from elders on porches to children waking at night to sigh in the forest, was a shared, vague belief. No one dared verify that within that mountain lay a door not meant for humans, a place where life wasn't granted, but bound. And Jacob Elbridge was still there with what he called family. On a July night in 1898, during a heavy summer of storms that never broke into rain, the sky over Beckett Hollow glowed red like old blood. From the southern valley's edge, the first to see the column of smoke rising straight from the north cried out, "It's burning! The womb is burning!" No one knew where the fire started. No thunder, no sign of lightning. That summer, the ground was so damp grass wouldn't catch, and rotten wood needed 2 weeks of drying to smolder. Yet in one night, Jacob Elbridge's thick oak structure, 7 rooms, corridors twisting like roots, erupted as if something inside had exploded. The flames spiraled inward, not outward, as if the bizarre structure was consuming itself. The villagers didn't dare fight the fire. They stood far below at the mountain's base, watching the red glow blaze like hell's open mouth. Some covered their mouths against the smoke. Others covered their ears, swearing they heard laughter in the flames, a man's voice, a woman's, then a child's, all blending into a chilling, shrill sound like a mistuned violin. The fire raged for 7 hours, then stopped abruptly at dawn, leaving a pile of black ash, the smell of burnt hair and a silence that chilled. 3 days later, they dared climb the mountain. What they found in the ashes turned rumors into something worse than imagination. First was Jacob's body found in the central room, once the kitchen, or at least the only place with a chimney. His corpse was charred, but not ash, back arched as if broken before, arms crossed over his chest, knuckles blackened, but still countable at 10. A cord of long braided hair was wrapped 3 times around his neck, knotted at the nape. The unofficial coroners, a group of hunters and 2 former butchers, determined the hair wasn't Jacob's. It was a woman's long, soft, partly silver, woven like a necklace. One recognized its scent. It's the perfume Mary used, iris and pine oil. 6 FT from Jacob in a basement, or rather a room deep underground, they found the second body, Mary Elbridge. She lay on a charred wooden bed, draped in scorched white lace, hands clasped over her chest, holding a bundle of flowers crumbled to dust. Her body wasn't decayed, but wasn't whole. Her skin was coated in tree resin or beeswax, hardened like a mask. Her eyes were covered with 2 smooth white stones. Her mouth sewn with red thread, and a small cloth on her chest bore the stitched word beloved. Mary's death wasn't from the fire. She'd been prepared beforehand, placed there in a ritual of ending or beginning. But the third body was more horrific. Not far from Mary's bed, under collapsed beams, they found a blackened form the size of a 10-year-old, but with bones unlike any human's. The head was large, disproportionate. Cheekbones protruded as if stretched. The lower jaw skewed left with extra cartilage at the joints. The hand had 6 fingers, each with long, dark nails like a beast's. No birth certificate, no name, no medical record. But what made them unable to turn away was the jawbone. One of the group took the detached skull to Pastor Clean, who compared it to a copied registry from when Jacob was young, when basic dental records were kept for eligible men. The result kept him awake 3 nights. The child's lower jaw structure almost perfectly matched Jacob's, not just genetic similarity, but identical defects. A front tooth sharply misaligned left a healed crack in the jawbone from a childhood fall, clearly noted in records. The child wasn't just Mary's, it was Jacob's. And if true, Jacob had fathered it with his own sister. The fire destroyed the womb, but in the ashes they found the truth in that windowless house. A family had reproduced itself, not through generations, not through love, but through obsession and deviance. A bloodline had reached its end, coiling into itself and birthing a form that shouldn't exist. One villager, later sent to an asylum for paranoia, claimed he saw something in the still warm ashes, a small footprint, six-toed, pressed clearly in the ash, as if the creature had walked out and vanished into the forest before anyone arrived. No one believed him, but no one dared deny it. For that fire, thought to erase everything, left the final proof of an unnameable tragedy, a genetic loop, a forbidden love, and a being unwelcomed by God or man. In the fall of 1898, 3 months after the fire razed the womb, leaving 3 bodies no one dared bury traditionally, a strange boy appeared at the doorstep of Beckett Hollow's small church. No one saw him arrive. No one knew where he came from. But that morning, Pastor Elias Klenn opened the chapel as usual and found the boy sitting neatly on the stone steps, clothed, smudged with ash, feet bare and cracked, but sitting upright like a wooden statue, eyes wide as if never blinking. He gave no name, but in his breast pocket was a rolled-up scrap of paper written in red-brown ink. E. Jacobson, 7 years old, orphan. The handwriting was steady, perfect, not a child's. The paper listed no birthplace, no kin, no reason for his presence, just the name and one line on the back. The son is not ready. Pastor Klenn, over 50, was known for kindness. He'd taken in 3 other orphans after past flu outbreaks, none surviving 2 winters. His wife died young. His son drowned in the Raven River at 10. Some said he was cursed with children. Others said God tested him. But seeing the boy alone, unblinking, clutching a small wooden ring like a toy, Klenn didn't hesitate. He opened the door, led him inside, and recorded in the parish log, Jacobson, male, 7 years old, adopted by Elias Klenn. No one questioned the name's origin, but those who dared read the old Elbridge records would see Jacob was the father's name, and son was a suffix never acknowledged from that day. E. Jacobson lived behind the church in a small hut he built from branches, dry roots and old cloth from the pastor. He refused to enter the house even in winter. When asked why, he said, "The church walls silence." Mother's voice. When asked who Mother was, he stayed silent. But each night before sleep he lit a candle, placed the wooden ring between his hands, and whispered in an unknown tongue like a warped lullaby. The wooden ring matched those seen on Jacob and Mary, hand-carved, spiraled with faded ink, not born but returned. At first, Klenn noted the boy's behavior as odd, but harmless. He kept a private journal. He doesn't eat meat, only vegetables and broth, never asks about God, never asks about school, but he reads fast. Even the ancient Latin scriptures I've locked away since youth. A week later, he doesn't change. His face stays the same, smiles like an adult. Sometimes at night I hear singing from the backyard, not a child's voice, a duet. One high, one low, blended. Month 2, he calls me father, but not in a child's tone, like someone older than me, like he's mimicking a familiar role. Month 3, I saw him watching me sleep, standing in the doorway, unblinking, holding the wooden ring, eyes glowing like embers. Once I pretended to sleep to observe, he whispered, "Father sleeps like before. I still watch as always." Month 4. I feel small before him. Not physically in presence. He looks at me as if I'm the child and he's the father, the one who made me. Once I dropped the Bible and he picked it up saying, "This book was wrong from the start. Only blood keeps what's true." The more Klenn wrote, the further he drifted from reality. He preached trembling. He avoided the boy's eyes and he began to question, was E. Jacobson the child burned in the 1898 fire? If so, how did he survive? How did he have the wooden ring? How did he know things only Jacob and Mary knew? The biggest question he dared not write. Was this boy, Jacob, the mistaken being returned as promised when the son wasn't ready? In his journal, the final line before he stopped writing was scratched out and rewritten repeatedly. He doesn't grow, but I age too fast. Beckett Hollow didn't know who Clem lived with, but they felt it passing the church. The air grew colder. The faint smell of burnt hair lingered, and in the silent forest they heard two laughs, a horseman's, a woman's, echoing from the earth. And the boy, E. Jacobson, he still slept in the hut behind the chapel, the wooden ring always on his hand, eyes open all night, and each morning he stared at the sun, whispering, "Not yet." But soon after that winter, Beckett Hollow was never the same. The small village, once proud of its seclusion and resilience, wooden houses with red bark roofs, terrace cornfields taller than men, church bells ringing every Sunday morning, began to unravel as if an invisible hand was dismantling it from within. After E. Jacobson arrived and lived with Clem, strange things began. Not loud, not clear, but undeniable. First, livestock vanished. One night, Bowman's goats broke their fence, ran north and never returned. Two of the Mathers dairy cows were found dead by the creek, eyes wide, tongues missing. Such events, once routine mountain mishaps, came relentlessly, patterned, all centered on one place where the womb once stood, now just ash, called by a colder name, the burned place. No one dared step there, though trees regrew and rain washed away most traces of the fire. When wind blew, they heard wood groaning, though no house remained. Some saw a flickering light among the trees, though no home stood. Some swore they heard a wordless lullaby, its melody haunting like an offbeat heart. Then people began disappearing. First was Samuel Reed's, a 13-year-old blacksmith's son who loved exploring, climbing mountains with a slingshot for bird nests. One Sunday, he went to pick wild berries and didn't return. They found his shoes neatly placed by the creek and a small sharpened stick, his toy for playing with his sister. No blood, no drag marks, just a small footprint leading into the forest. Six-toed. A month later, Clara Ara, the young red-haired wife of the church gardener, whose laugh rang like wind chimes, vanished. Her husband said she began sleepwalking, whispering to someone standing among the trees. Once he saw her sitting by E. Jacobson's hut, though she'd been asleep in bed moments before. The next morning, Clara Ara was gone. All that remained was her dirt-stained handkerchief pinned between two dry branches, as if placed deliberately. They began speaking of a figure with E. Jacobson, not another child, not a villager. They called it the Invisible Sister, a presence no one saw clearly, but all felt. Whenever E. Jacobson stood near the forest's edge, something was beside him, a dense void like compressed air, dark and heavy, with the scent of burnt pine and wet wood. Children described her as a faceless woman, hair to the ground, barefoot, smelling of scorched resin and damp timber. One child who dared approach fell into a fever for 3 days, repeating, she whispered in my head. She said, "Her brother is back, and she won't let anyone leave again." The disappearances grew, not loud, not simultaneous, but steady. An old man lost after a service, a postman who didn't return from the forest wrote, "A couple moving into a house near the woods, leaving only a half-cooked meal and a burning stove. No traces." Fear spread like mold on a winter wall, silent, creeping, unstoppable. Old families sold their land, sometimes for nothing. Henry Wells fled with his family at night, leaving only a carved message on his door. "Cannot save those who don't want saving." The community unraveled. The church was a third full. The general store closed early. The school stood empty. Clem still preached, but his eyes sank. His voice faltered like a man losing faith. And through it all, E. Jacobson remained unchanged, not growing, not shifting. Each morning he sat by his hut, wooden ring on his hand, carving spirals in the dirt, circles within circles growing wider. Those who looked closely saw a clear symbol, a spiral like the paths in the womb. When asked about the disappearances, he only smiled. And on moonless nights, some swore they heard him call, "Sister, we're still missing one." Beckett Hollow didn't say it, but they knew what they tried to bury in those ashes didn't stay buried, and the invisible sister with the boy wasn't a ghost. It was memory, blood continuation, something that never left the land where it was born in wrongness and obsession. In April 1934, over 30 years after the womb burned and Beckett Hollow faded into obscurity, the federal government sent a survey team to the mountains for a rural electrification project. Leading them was Lewis Penn, a 38-year-old veteran surveyor known for precision, science, and dismissing folktales. His record brimmed with praise for thoroughness, especially his ability to leave no plot unmapped, even in dense forests or rugged terrain. So when maps showed the northern Beckett Hollow, once Elbridge land had never been officially surveyed, Penn prioritized it. He went alone, carrying a hand-drawn map, rope, flashlight, compass, and a standard-issue pistol. His journal described the area as dry, strangely quiet, trees tangled as if untouched for decades. But a few steps into the forest, he felt something off, like the ground didn't want him there. He didn't trust feelings, so he pressed deeper. By noon, he found it. A round stone structure covered in moss, in a forest clearing like an abandoned well, but clearing the rotted wood revealed no water, only a spiral staircase hand-carved from slate descending into darkness. Penn wrote, "Not a well, no pulley, no drainage. This staircase was built to go down, not to bring anything up." Without enough safety rope, he tied one end around his waist, holding a flashlight in one hand, the other on the cold stone wall. The deeper he went, the thicker the air, and his flashlight flickered. Despite new batteries, he wrote, "I hear nothing, no wind, no sound, but it feels like someone's breathing on my neck." The bottom was a round room 10 ft high, over 15 ft wide. Walls covered in old mirrors, each cracked in a single line from top to bottom, reflecting distorted light. The room had no exit, no door, just mirrors facing each other, creating an endless maze of reflections. In the center, on an old wooden block, was a small wooden ring. Penn picked it up. It was light and cold. Inside was hand-carved in Old English, E. Jacobson. Below the name, a small symbol matched the spiral in old Elbridge maps. Under his fading flashlight, he circled the room, checking the mirrors. Then he stopped. On one mirror opposite the staircase, something didn't reflect his movements. When he raised his left hand, the reflection stood still. When he breathed heavily, the mirror fogged. But one spot stayed clear, and from that spot, words appeared as if written from the other side in dried blood. "The blood never breaks." Right after those words, Penn's notebook turned frantic. His handwriting went from clear to trembling, then scrolled as if he'd lost control. Some pages repeated one sentence, "It knows my name, it knows my name. It knows I'm here." Then a single slanted line. Two voices singing, one high, one low, but the same song. That was his final entry. 3 days later, the survey team reached Penn's marked rendezvous point, but he wasn't there. His truck remained locked, tank full. His flashlight was found in a tree hollow 5 miles away, still with power. His pistol lay under a rock crevice, untouched. His notebook was torn in half, the latter part missing. At the marked well, only blackened wood fragments remained, as if someone tried to burn it, but the fire consumed only half the steps before dying out. Penn was never found. No body, no trace, only rumors spread through the mountains. He descended the deepest layer of the burned place, and instead of mapping land, he mapped something else, a dimension waiting. And in those mirrors, someone had been waiting for him. After his disappearance, the government never resurveyed Beckett Hollow. On maps, the area was marked inaccessible due to hazardous terrain. But to locals, its true name remained, the place that still watches. From 1934 onward, local maps vaguely noted northern Beckett Hollow as uninhabited hazardous terrain, but Appalachians didn't need maps to know what it was. They'd named it long ago after the fire, the disappearances, and the child with the wooden ring who emerged from the ashes, whom no one dared call human, the burned place. No one lived nearby anymore. Houses clinging to the mountainside were abandoned, rotted, swallowed by vines as if they'd never existed. Trails leading north were erased by wind and time, as if the land refused memory. Beckett Hollow's people learned to speak indirectly about it. Don't go too far past the pines. There's no path there, not a place for the living, but they meant the burned place. By day, the area was eerily silent. No birds, no squirrels, no wind. Leaves didn't sway or fall, frozen in place. The ground, soft as decayed moss, held no water. In the clearing where the womb once stood, regrown trees never rose above the knee, as if something beneath stopped their growth. But at night, memory awoke. Children, still curious or not yet tamed by fear, whispered of singing. They said, if you climbed the hill behind the church at 3 a.m., one fog hung thick and dogs didn't bark. You'd hear an old wordless song by two voices, one deep, one high, male and female, always blending, never off-key, never repeating, and most terrifying, never stopping. A 10-year-old girl, Amelia, dreamed of the song for 3 nights, prompting her parents to seek an exorcism. When she woke, she didn't speak or eat, only drew charcoal spirals on the wall, circles within circles, shrinking to a center where 2 figures stood, hand in hand, mouth sewn with red thread. She wasn't alone. Emery, a 4-year-old boy, told his mother he had an invisible sister waiting in the woods. When his father struck him, he cried and whispered, "She told me not to be afraid." She said, "I'm her blood." Though no one admitted it, adults set unspoken rules. Don't mention Elbridge, don't mention the burned place, keep children within fences and never wear wooden rings. The local woodshop stopped selling oak crafts. By the 1940s, a craftsman, Albee, carved a ring based on his grandmother's tale of the sister's ring and wore it. 2 days later, he cut off the finger, threw it down a well, and quit. When asked why, he repeated, "It sang in my head. Every time I slept, I saw myself marrying myself." Silence wasn't forgetting. It was survival. They knew memory shouldn't be unearthed, for each mention was like summoning a sleeping spirit, and if it woke, it wouldn't return alone. The pastor, after Clen, a young man from Charleston, tried to uncover the land's past. He asked questions, sought old records, traced the 1898 census. A month later, he packed and left at night, leaving a note on the pulpit. "I thought I came to preach light, but this land grows only from ash, and in that ash, I heard the voice of something not human." No one blamed him, no one replaced him. The church stood empty. Grass grew taller than windows. The bell fell silent. The burned place became an invisible boundary between Appalachia and the world. No signs, no fences, but everyone knew crossing it meant entering where blood bred itself and sang a song not for human ears. And when wind blew through, listen long, listen still, you'd hear a faint hum, not born but returned, not lovers, but one. Longtime residents never repeated it, but they bowed their heads passing the northern ridge, eyes closed, avoiding the gaze rising from the earth, for they knew the blood there never stopped flowing. It just flowed backward. In spring 1979, in the moldy basement of an old church outside Charlottesville, Virginia, a University of Virginia anthropology student, Daniel Hurst, found a yellowed newspaper clipping tucked in a Bible's last page. The faded headline read, "J.L.B. Bridge, presumed dead in 1898. Fire, no kin, a brief note, no photo, no details." But Elbridge stopped him. Working on a thesis about forgotten lands and American folklore, Daniel had heard the name in vague Appalachian oral tales, but never found proof. Driven by perfectionism and obsession, he scoured old churches, county offices in West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee, seeking land maps, death records, censuses, and pastors' forgotten logs. After 3 months, he uncovered scattered haunting documents, maps of abandoned fields, unclaimed land deeds, dozens of disappearances from 1898 to the 1960s, mostly near a remote forest by Beckett Hollow, plotting each on a hand-drawn map. A shape emerged, a giant spiral, each incident a point, each missing name, a link at its center, the land once owned by the Elbridges. Daniel called it the Spiral of Silence. He wrote, "They weren't erased from history. They were hidden like a knife buried deep. Each generation their blood resurfaces in a new form." Checking signatures on old deeds, Daniel found many signed with a single E. Others read E. Jacobson with no personal details. Tracing these, he realized the burned place's land was never truly reclaimed. It always belonged to someone with that vague name, and the deeds were notarized by pastors who soon died or vanished. Daniel wrote his advisor, requesting funds to return and survey the site. The polite rejection urged focus on provable topics. Undeterred, Daniel funded himself, renting a car and leaving. In June 1981, he reached Beckett Hollow without registering locally. Following his map, he headed north to a place untouched for 80 years. He was last seen at a nearby gas station buying a compass, protein bars, 2 water bottles, and film for an old camera. 3 days later, his rental car was found at the forest's edge, keys unlocked. Inside was a stack of hand-drawn papers, including a massive circular map with frantic notes. In the bottom right, a line was underlined thrice. He married his own sister. Their child still walks. Police didn't pursue, citing no crime in Daniel's adulthood, but his roommate contacted to collect his belongings, found a horrifying sketchbook, dozens of pencil drawings repeating one image, a woman in a wedding dress, hair hiding her face beside a boy growing older. Each sketch until the last, where both stood identical mouths sewn with red thread, each wearing a matching wooden ring. The final photo from Daniel's camera, the only intact film, showed a blurred figure behind a twisted tree. It wore a white dress, arms limp, hair covering its face. Half its body was in shadow. In the corner, under sunlight through the canopy, lay a wooden ring inscribed. We never stopped. Daniel Hurst was never found. No remains, no clues, no sound, only scattered notes, one photo, and a warning in images. The spiral wasn't done. It waited for the next to enter its center. Beneath Appalachia's misty ridges, where maps are formalities and lore is a distant echo, exists a story never in textbooks, never raised in hearings, never acknowledged by authorities. The Elbridge bloodline, not branching like a family tree, but coiling into a circle, not splitting into generations, but weaving as a closed loop. Where brother marries sister, sister bears child, child becomes brother, continuing the cycle under a new name, in a new body, with the same inescapable blood. From the strange house called the W in 1890 to nearly a century of disappearances around Beckett Hollow, from E. Jacobson's mysterious arrival to the spiral, Daniel Hurst drew, with his hands and blood all point to one thing. This wasn't a family, it was a phenomenon, a symbol of what America wants to forget but can't erase. A truth too perverse to face, too primal to explain, too American to deny. No lineage is like the Elbridges. They left no trace as ancestors do, no gravestones, no birth certificates, no wills. Instead, torn maps, records lost in sudden floods, land deeds signed with an E. They exist in history's blanks where the government avoids light. For if this story were public, America would face the truth in its heart without war, invasion, or zealotry. A closed biological system once thrived, and no one dared stop it. Why the government's silence? Why the churches turned back? Why did Beckett Hollow's people who heard the dual voice song, saw shadows glide through trees, buried kin without bodies, choose such silence? Not fear, shame, a collective disgrace no one named. The Elbridges weren't an alien anomaly. They were the result of abandonment of policies making Appalachia a no-man's land, where poverty and isolation bred a moral void. No schools, no doctors, no law, no oversight, no salvation. And when no one came, the people turned inward, loved themselves, birthed themselves. In Pastor Elias Clay's surviving journal, the man who raised E. Jacobson and died with his mouth sewn red, one scrolled line in capitals read, "They never needed others. They made themselves." Imagine a cycle where brother weds sister, sister bears child, the child grows not calling father, but itself, and when grown, it repeats the circle. No outsiders, no one enters, no one leaves. A closed ecosystem driven not by love, but by inescapable despair. The story terrifies not just for incest, but for its success. The Elbridges didn't die out. Nature didn't end them. They thrived, persisted through generations, blended into crowds, and continued, if not in flesh, then in memory. A memory blood carries never washed clean. Rumors persist. In a Kentucky border town, a family lives in a house with drawn curtains where the son calls his unseen mother wife. In Tennessee, a retired teacher was caught drawing white chalk spirals on a classroom board, whispering, "The blood knows the way." A nurse at an Appalachian mental clinic said a nameless patient without record sat before a mirror each night, whispering in two voices, one high, one low. She said, "He looked at me like he was my father, then called me sister. I didn't know who I was after 3 weeks there." She quit, left nursing, and never returned to the mountains. And a quiet rumor among Appalachia's elders, those with no teeth to speak but memories intact, says the last of that bloodline lives. No clear form, no age. Maybe an old man with a long beard. Maybe a child yet to speak. Maybe in the woods. Maybe in a town under a false name, living normally, but their blood is Elbridge. No proof needed. They don't require proof to exist. They've survived a century without corpses. They endured fire, oblivion, and a nation's denial, and they still haven't stopped. You can choose not to believe. Call it legend, coincidence, fabrication. But if you wander Appalachia's forests and hear two voices singing a wordless tune, don't answer, don't look back. Don't notice the wooden ring on the ground, and never cross the burned place's boundary. For in Appalachia, blood doesn't flow forward. It flows in circles, closed like a curse America never dared name. The story of Jacob and Mary Elbridge, siblings who married, lived secluded in Appalachia, and bore a deformed child, isn't just a horrific tragedy, but a mirror reflecting what happens when society abandons forgotten communities. Throughout, we see the consequences of prolonged isolation. Beckett Hollow's lack of healthcare, education, or effective law pushed its people to manage their fear and secrets alone. In that void, the Elbridge incestuous loop formed and persisted across generations. The question is, if the community, government, or any authority had intervened early, would it have gone this far? The lesson for modern America is that isolation is never harmless. Mountain communities, indigenous groups, minorities, or fringe societies need equal access to basic support, not just for human rights, but to prevent deviations from silently becoming tragedies. Remember, Jacob and Mary weren't born to symbolize deviance. They were products of an abandoned land where blood didn't flow to the heart, but circled in loneliness and secrets. The scariest part, similar circles may still turn quietly, like the nighttime songs in Appalachia's forests. If this story chills and provokes you, subscribe to catch more of America's buried secrets. Thank you for bravely joining us. See you in the next video, where truth rises from the ashes.